Shalom, welcome to the Chai Center, welcome to the Chai Academy, and hope you're all doing well. Today's class is going to be on a fascinating Jewish personality, and today we're going to focus on a fellow by the name of Menachem Mendel Beilis. We've discussed tragic figures in the past. Leo Frank in Atlanta, or Dreyfus in France, accused of crimes they didn't commit. This particular fellow, Menachem Mendel Beilis, was accused of a blood libel. Now, a blood libel is such a far-fetched accusation. It's basically accusing specifically Jews of killing Christian children for their blood. So we can put their blood in the matzahs that we eat on Passover. That essentially is what a blood libel is. So the last blood libel, and this is, by the way, in Europe, Eastern and Western Europe, it was rampant blood libels against the Jewish people, rampant. With basically we vampires. We drink blood of Christian children, and place it in our ritual objects, etc. Matzah, wine, and it's just so insane and far-fetched. It's just insane. The last recorded one was this story, the following story. So Menachem Mendel Beilis was born in 1874, and he was born into a Hasidic family, though he was not really religious. I guess maybe he was religious as a child, but he grew up non-religious, and he was employed. He went to war, by the way. He was an officer in the army, and after serving in the army, he got married. He had 5 kids, and this story took place in 1911. In 1911, as a father already having 5 children, he was employed as a supervisor. He was employed as a supervisor in a brick factory in Kiev. In March of 2011, a young 13-year-old Christian child by the name of Andrei Yushansky was found not far from the brick factory. He was found dead. He disappeared on his way to school. And 8 days later, he was found dead. He was found stabbed to death and beaten to death, etc. And there was an eyewitness who said that he saw a Jewish person walking with Andrei Yushansky, and therefore it was a Jewish person that killed Andrei Yushansky. That was the logic. Regardless, the supervisor in this brick factory, which was very close to where this body was found, his name was Menachem Mendel Beilis. He was Jewish, and therefore he was arrested. And the eyewitness says, yep, it was him, it was him, it was him. So he was arrested for killing Andrei Yushansky. He was he was placed in prison while awaiting trial. Now, we know in the United States we have a right to a swift trial. So Menachem Mendel Beilis was sat 2 years in prison before any trial took place. I guess the government was building their case. I'm not quite sure. So he was in prison. About a year of him sitting in prison, just languishing in prison. He was approached by the government and this was probably a ploy to say that he was going to be pardoned due to a national pardon, and and he would, he should just, sign here and sign there and he'll be pardoned. He said, I'm not signing anything. I want a fair trial. So they said, we can bring you out and force you to sign. He goes, I'm not signing. He says, we can shoot you. He goes, shoot me. He says, we can drag you. He goes, drag you. I'm not leaving this prison until I get a fair trial. Now, that was a year after. During the 2 years he was in prison, the whole Russian Empire was in uproar over the fact that Christian kids were being used for ritual murder by Jews. And so, once again, a blood libel. But this story spread far and wide. Beilis, to his credit, he said, if I sign a confession, or if they let me go and there's no trial, we will never be rid of this accusation. And I will always be tainted. That I was pardoned. Now, as we know, a pardon is usually a guilty person's pardoned by the president, or pardoned by the government, by the governor, by the executive, whomever. So he said, no, he said to himself, and this is what he wrote much later on, and it was true, by the way, he was proven true. He said, I refuse to be pardoned. I want a fair trial. For 2 years, 1911 and 1912, a fellow by the name of Nikolai Krasovsky, he was the chief investigator of the Kiev Police Department. He was determined to get to the truth. So he wasn't a Jew lover, but he was a truth lover. And he said to himself, now this fellow, we don't know if it was Beilis. Beilis has been accused, but let's find out who it was. And he was told, find this guy guilty. He said, no, I'm not going to find this guy guilty. I'm going to find the perp guilty. And he researched and investigated, and eventually, because he did not point a finger at Beilis, even though Beilis was in prison awaiting trial, he was actually fired from his post. How long could you investigate Beilis when we all know that Beilis was the man? While he was, so he was fired. When he was fired, he didn't stop investigating, to his credit. He had privately, together with other former investigators, continued the search for who killed this Andrei Ushansky. Who killed him? And he was eventually, by the way, this Nikolai Kraslovsky was eventually arrested because he was interfering in an ongoing investigation. True, he started the investigation, but the fact that he was a private citizen still investigating, he was investigated, he was acquitted. But through his due diligence, he actually came up with a real perp. There were actually 3 people involved, and one of these 3 people were friendly with the family, and but it took every ounce of tenacity of this guy to really search for the truth, because as far as the government was concerned, this was a slam dunk. As far as the country was concerned, blood libel, how dare they? This guy's got to go be killed or prison for life or whatever. Eventually, in 2013, came time for the trial. So remember, he was arrested. He was arrested in June of 2011. This trial took place in September, end of September, October 2013. So the government brought a trial that this fellow was killed, and one of their expert witnesses basically explained what a blood libel was, explained what he's being accused of killing this Christian boy for his blood. And so the expert witness was a priest from Tashkent, Tashkent, of course, was not a favorite place of the Jewish people. And Tashkent was in Russia, but like I believe it's like southeast Russia is where Tashkent is. And his name was Justinas. I had to look it up. Justinas Prenatis. He was the expert witness. Now, he was an author of a book that was published that was called Talmud Unmasked. In his book that he wrote many, many years before, he basically said that in the Talmud we could find many, many quotes of the Talmud to show what little regard for the Jews had of Gentiles, and specifically Christians. He was a priest, by the way. So he was their expert witness that basically came up and said that the Jews do kill the Christians for blood, and they do not value Christian life. And he proved it from the Talmud. It was a weak case. It was a very weak case to begin with, and even even the government, recognized that it was a weak case. So anyway, Justinas Prenatis from Tashkent, right, was the expert witness, and he explained exactly why they need the blood. Now, a couple of things that worked against the government and worked against this particular hate-mongering priest. One is that this child was killed on Shabbos. He had an alibi. Menachem Mendel Beilis had an alibi, is that he was working on the Sabbath. He wasn't a Jew that kept the Sabbath. He wasn't. So his alibi was that he was working on the Sabbath, and he even got a shipment of supplies that he personally signed for, dated, that the defense showed. So the prosecution said, well, it wasn't inconceivable that he ran out for a few minutes, and he was able to run out from work and then come back to work and still sign. The defense totally attacked Justinas Prenatis. And they said that okay, so he's the author of Talmud Unmasked. So you know Talmud? And he said, yes, I know Talmud very well. So they said to him, do you know the tractate called Chulin? So he said, I don't know what it is. So they laughed at him. And they said, well, the tractate of Chulin describes all the laws prohibiting Jews from eating non-sanctioned foods. In other words, there were certain foods, that were certain animals, etc., that were offered up on the temple, on the altar, and that were forbidden. But there's a whole slew of foods that were not offered up on the temple, on the altar, that were still forbidden. So they're non-holy, they're non-sanctioned, but they're still forbidden. For example, blood. Blood was not offered up on the Temple Mount. It wasn't, it was, or some of it were, but there was generally blood, even though it wasn't offered, is still forbidden. So that's what chulin is. So blood one is forbidden to consume blood. And then they went through many other places in the Torah, in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, in the Code of Jewish Law, how you're not allowed to mix meat and milk, how a Jew is not allowed to eat blood at all, and in fact, you have to go through great lengths in order to remove the blood from an animal. You have to soak and salt it and rinse it, and then soak and then salt. You have to soak it, salt it, rinse it, and you have to rinse it many times to make sure that there's no blood before you, 7 times I believe, before you even consult it, and then you have to soak it and then rinse it off, and you if it's you have to split, you can't be too thick because then you can't get rid of the blood, etc. And if it's an inner organ, you cannot salting is not enough. You need to grill it in order to. And they pounded this guy and they made him look stupid. here's the fellow who wrote the book, Talmud on Mass, didn't know what he was talking about. And they didn't only bring in Jewish witnesses to make mincemeat out of Justina Prenatis. They also brought in Christian theologians who understood very well that Jews do not eat blood. And these Christian theologians, they proved that it was an idiocy for the government and to bring in an expert witness that they need the blood for the matzahs and their wine on Passover. And a whole slew of them. And in fact, there were so many theologians and political activists who were not Jewish, and writers and authors who had researched this to death and said it's not true. There's no such thing. The blood libel is a fallacy. It's fallacious and always has been. Then they brought something else that was discussed. Justina Prenatis said that the boy was stabbed 13 times. The reason why he was stabbed, there were 13 wounds, is because in Judaism there's something called the 13 attributes of mercy that the Jews recite every day. 13 is a big number. The Jews believe that God has 13 attributes of mercy, and that's why a Jewish boy is bar mitzvah at 13, etc., etc. It turns out he was stabbed 14 times. So while initially they thought he was stabbed 13 times, so they made a mockery out of the court system, and they were brought down for it. And eventually, the jury, who were Russian non-Jews, there wasn't even intelligentsia; it was regular Russian citizens. Some belonged to the Tsar's party, some belonged to the anti-Tsar's party, the rebellion, and they acquitted him. And by the way, at that time that he was completely acquitted, not pardoned, acquitted. That was a time that was even in Muslim papers, in Palestine under the Ottoman Empire, right? They spoke about the idiocy of a blood libel, and they mocked the Russian system. When they acquitted him, Menachem Mendel, Beilis became a hero and a celebrity. A hero because he demanded a fair trial, and he wasn't just willing to be pardoned. A celebrity because they wrote books after this guy. There was actually 3, not 1, 3 theaters in the United States that had, you could find 3 theaters that showed the story of Menachem Beilis. He refused to make money off of it. So while he was offered money for speaking engagements, while he was offered money for interviews, etc., he refused, and he picked up and he moved to Palestine. He moved to Ottoman British. Wasn't British mandated. It was Ottoman ruled Palestine, which eventually became Israel, and shortly thereafter, so 1915, I believe he moved, and he tried as hard as he could to make money. And he was a failure, and he was told, why didn't you move to the United States? He said, if I came to Palestine as a pauper and I embraced it, I'm definitely not going to embrace it, the land I love. But because he and his family were literally dying from starvation, he eventually moved to the United States. He moved to New York. We actually wrote a book of an autobiography. It's called The Story of My Suffering. And he died suddenly, and he was buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery in Glendale, New York. Ironically, he was buried very close to another hero, Leo Frank, who also was accused of killing Mary Fagan, which is, you can find that on the Chai Academy. You can find the story of Leo Frank, and there was even though by the time he died in 1921, people had kind of slowly forgotten his story 10 years prior, or 8 years prior. It resurfaced, and there were actually 4,000 people that came to pay tributes, pay their respects to Menachem Mendel. But they say the journalists at the time, they said it was such chaos that even the police could not control the crowd. They tell a story that 6 months before he died, he did give an interview to the Jewish Telegraph, and he said, they asked him, what sticks in your mind as something outstanding? So he goes, the chief investigator of the Kiev Police Department, Nikolai Kraslovsky, he said the Christian theologians who stepped up, and it was not to their benefit that they stepped up, because he lost his job, the chief investigator. Others were ridiculed for stepping up. He said, but they stepped up for truth. They stepped up for the right thing. So he goes, that was the most outstanding thing. And even though their lives were ruined by doing so, they still did so. You can visit his grave in Mount Carmel. It's actually mostly in Hebrew. His grave, I believe the top has it in English. I once visited years ago. I kind of don't remember, but I believe it was all in Hebrew. But he was a tragic figure that thankfully. So here's the irony: Menachem Mendel Beilis accused in Ukraine, where, as we know, the Ukraine in Kiev not fund under the Russian Empire, not funded the Jews, and he survived. Arthur Dreyfus in France was accused of treason. You can watch Arthur Dreyfus in the Chai Academy, and he survived. Leo Frank, accused of killing Mary Fagan in the United States, which you would think would have the fairest of the fair compared to France and Ukraine, for crying out loud. He was actually lynched by a mob. So Leo Frank, the American, also in a pencil factory, he was lynched. The only one that was killed. But nobody has been accused of blood libel since. In Prague, back in the day, they killed so many Jews because of blood libel, and there was just so many blood libels. He was the last of blood libel, and they put it to rest. Hopefully, once and for all. More lessons as such, classes, etc., courses can be found on the chaicenter.com/academy. This coming Sunday is Tisha B'Av, and we have a great program for you on Zoom and on Facebook Live, please God. We have a speaker by the name of Ari Seicha this Sunday at 7:30, July 18th, at 7:30 p.m. Ari Seicha, he's a rocket scientist, one of those that worked on the Iron Dome. He basically worked in missile defense, missile offense for that matter, and he's going to talk about the Iron Dome, the miracle that saves the Jews in Israel from the onslaught of Hamas and Hamas terrorists, and also the Iranian Hezbollah terrorists, the Iron Dome. So that's 7:30. We'll have it here on Zoom and also on Facebook Live for Sunday 7:30, July 18th. God bless. Help spread the word.